Today, companies are throwing billions of dollars at specialized AI agents, one for sales, one for support, one for data analysis, and whatnot. And they are creating a fragmented mess that doesn't actually solve their problems. It actually makes it worse. In the meantime, they are missing the bigger opportunity using general purpose agents that can think across domains and can adapt to real business challenges. So, why are companies getting AI adoption so wrong and what should they be doing instead? That's exactly what we are going to find out in this episode of the Agentic Enterprise with Boris Renski, CEO at Apelogic, Mario Di Dio, GM of Networking at Helium Mobile, and Joey Padden, VP of Network Architecture at Helium Mobile. Boris, Mario, Joey, it's great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you for having us. It's great to be here.
It's good to be here. Good to see you after so many years.
Yeah, it's true. It's been a while since we have spoken. Talk about what are you up to these days? Tell us a bit about Apelogic.
Yeah, so Apelogic is going to be my, I guess, third foray into the entrepreneurial world. And what we're building is a system for bridging general purpose AI agents like Claude or like ChatGPT to large data warehouses and large data pools, such that anybody armed with a Claude can just go in and ask questions inside Claude about any type of company data and get instant answers, get the ability to chart those answers, plot those answers, things like that. And the concept was actually born out of some of the problems that we were tackling at Helium initially. So maybe I'll hand over to Mario and he can talk about Helium and the problem.
The easiest way to talk about Helium Mobile is that we are a mobile plan operator in the US. We have more than 600,000 signups into our mobile service, so you can buy a phone plan from us, as well as we manage 120,000 access points in the US. Those access points are used by our own subscribers of the Helium Mobile phone plan, as well as from carriers like AT&T and others. So all this to say, without getting into details about Helium Mobile, is that our business is a very data intensive business, as you might imagine. You have behavior on the user side that we want to track. We have behavior in terms of like where do they connect, how much data they use, and how they use, as well as on the access point side. On the network side, what is the quality of this network? How is the access point up or down? How much data the access point is as transferred today. So a lot of data, and traditionally we've been managing that through dashboards, lots of dashboards, in an internal tool like Superset, which is essentially like a Tableau if you want to think about it that way. But the reality is that what happens in all these cases is that every single different business function has different needs on how to slice and dice the same amount of data. Technical people like Joey wanted to see in a certain way. He'll talk probably about it, his own specialty there, but there is BD person and salespeople and marketing. So the end result was that it was very hard to fit all these needs in a Superset dashboard. So living in the AI world, we're like, there must be a better way. And that's where the basic requirements for Apelogic were started. And that's how this Boris venture started.
Just to add more color to it, it's been a little bit of a journey working with Helium Mobile to figure out the correct structure for the product. Initially, we figured that there is a better way than just superset dashboards, and you have to be able to talk to data. So we went on a path that I think is very common among many. And we built kind of our own centralized data agent. We built a relatively heavy harness around that agent with all the details of like what the databases looks like, what the different business terms are, how it should follow a particular flow to query database, to give an answer, etc. And after playing it for a little while, we realized that it doesn't actually work very well. It works okay, but all too often it doesn't give correct answers. It takes a long time, and the whole thing's pretty brittle. So in parallel, we started experimenting with a different approach where a lot of people within Helium Mobile already were using Claude for all kinds of things. And we said, okay, well, how about you use a super stripped down version of our agent where we'll give you basically an MCP connector into your Claude instance. And within that MCP connector, there is already info about the database schema and sort of like a dictionary of common business terms, which is commonly referred to as the semantic layer, and let Claude do the work. And what we've realized is that that approach is actually a lot more effective. And it's gotten more and more effective over the last several months as Claude models have become more and more powerful. So with that in mind, we've decided to kind of pivot away from, like this buy an agent that will interrogate your data type business model to just focus on a connector for general purpose agents to the enterprise data.
You are making a very strong case for general purpose agents over specialized one. Why is that approach better? Why should companies use something like Cloud directly instead of buying specialized agents?
I mean, I think that it's a little bit more of like a broader philosophical argument that is happening right now about how AI is going to get adopted in the enterprise. And based on, my subjective experience with customers like Helium Mobile, it feels like, there's this pattern of everybody building specialized agents, and we were, the first ones that were guilty of it, and potentially not doing enough around enabling people within the organization to actually use general purpose agents. And you can see why that's happening also, because it's a very clean, understandable business model. There's a lot of companies that have raised money to basically build specialized agents where they wrap an LLM with some, purpose-built functionality, and then they monetize, effectively on a cost-plus basis, the LLM wrapper. But that resulted in, I think, too many of these companies. And this is kind of similar to what we saw in the .com era where, every single thing needed to have like its own website. And we're seeing a lot of this right now with specialized agents. I think over time, there's going to be massive consolidation. There's only going to be a few specialized agents. And the predominant form factor of working with AI is going to be around people actually using general purpose agents like Claude that are connected to, enterprise data, enterprise tools, and that evolve as sort of like a personal assistant for each enterprise employee. Because already now, these types of agents can probably do like 95% of the stuff that the specialized agents can do. So, the short of it is that I see like pretty heavy overinvestment into specialized agents and not enough accent on general purpose ones and making folks within a company effective using general purpose agents.
Let's get technical for a moment. What's the fundamental difference between a specialized agent and a general purpose agent? At the base level is the same LLM. So what makes them different?
I think one thing that comes into play here is how Frontier Labs approach training the like Frontier LLMs that a lot of the specialized agents end up using. And the agent ultimately is basically an LLM that is trained to, certain patterns in a certain data set and some memory and some harness around it. And I think that general purpose agents that are built by the frontier labs that also own the LLMs oftentimes perform better than the specialized ones because you have a more kind of a connected interplay between how the LLM was trained and how the harness was built. And you can see a little bit of that already peeking out as we start talking about like MCP versus CLI. There's been like a big debate around MCP is dead, no, it's not dead, etc. But where it's coming from is that I think Anthropic spent a lot of cycles actually training the latest set of its frontier LLMs to work and prefer and be biased towards the CLI tools versus the MCP. So if you give it a generic task and say, fetch data, all too often it will try and build something using, CLI commands versus trying to search through the, MCP data connectors. And we're already seeing this right now. So I think that this is going to continue accelerating because frontier labs understand that the LLMs are, they're commoditizing very quickly, and they need to use their unique LLM advantage to get themselves into the different use cases, into the enterprise. So you will see an increasingly tighter interplay between the LLM and how it's trained and the harness and the use cases that the very frontier lab is going after. And as such, I think that most people that are just building their own harnesses around frontier LLMs will end up in a disadvantaged position. Not to mention just the general market dynamic of like, you don't really need a specialized agents for everything. Just like you don't need to have, a pets.com specialized websites for selling pet food. You can go to Amazon and buy everything. Same thing is at play here. Like you can have one agent that an enterprise adopts that it vets against its security posture. Everybody gets a Claude, and then Claude gets connected everywhere, and it becomes super capable at helping people across all different tasks within a company.
I'm kind of curious that if you are endorsing that companies can just go and use cloud directly with their databases, why do they need Apelogic at all?
So what we basically give Claude is, you can think of it as like a purpose-built memory for interrogating data. Historically, in the data science world, this is referred to as the semantic layer. But the thing is that, we're tackling a particular problem. And the problem is like, you have a general purpose agent, assume it's infinitely smart, like, the smartest data scientist that you have. Irrespective of how smart it is or how well its harness been built to interplay with the underlying LLM, it needs to have context about the data that it's querying. It needs to understand what the database schema looks like. It needs to understand things like, in case of a Helium Mobile, like what is Helium Mobile's definition of monthly active user? And those things are very specific to a company. They're not generic. And moreover, in managing those things, you need to have some sort of interplay between like a number of actors. So for instance, Mario and Joey can be querying a database using Claude, but they themselves, nor their Claude knows like what the database schema looks like because they're not responsible for building it or maintaining it. So you need to have this context layer in between, and you need to have a system whereby people querying it with different questions ultimately continuously making this context better. So what Apelogic does is, let's say, Mario's querying database about the, Wi-Fi quality of service. Initially, when you go to Claude and ask, like, show me all the hotspots that have bad performance, Claude doesn't know what bad performance is, and it might make something up. Then Mario, Joey can go in and they can correct Claude and say, well, bad performance means that it's Wi-Fi hotspots with a consistently poor signal within this threshold. Then what's going to happen is that Apelogic is going to remember it and propose this as a term to be reused. And then you can have another party in play who is sort of like the administrator of the semantic layer, who will see that, hey, there is a new insight. We now know what the quality of service means. Should we save it so that the next time person asks about it, actually, Claude uses that same definition. So this kind of interconnect between a data source and, general purpose intelligence is something that just has to be there, irrespective of how smart the agent is or how good the LLM is. Not to mention, it makes the queries a lot more token efficient. So that's kind of what we're betting on, what we're building.
Now, I would like to talk to you, Mario and Joey. Can you share what things looked like before Apelogic versus how they are now? What actually changed for you?
Well, and I also want to hear from Joey, because also from a technical standpoint, but what I can tell you is that the easiest way for us to do something like Apelogic was to figure out a very long string of SQL query that we were going to query the database. And inevitably, I'll tell you what it was pretty openly, is that each single different SME had different or similar SQL queries. So we would end up with different numbers many times. And then this query were taking a long time to come back. So the problem is that everybody was making up the context that Boris was saying. Everybody was making it that context in a way that would make sense. But if you're not the one that builds the database, it's very easy to create something that was erroneous. And so there was this constant back and forth about what is the right query? What is the right query? And then we literally took like string of text, put it into a knowledge base, internal knowledge base, said, this is the query. So once you start working with things like Apelogic, then changes, because then you can put it in the context, and everybody knows that when you're asking about bad performance is exactly this specific context. And so, but maybe, I don't know, maybe Joey can add some more, as he has been even heavier than me involved in SQL queries before Apelogic.
To Apelogic, we had probably 3 people who were in charge of the SQL interaction, and the whole rest of the running all of the different user profiles. You had to give a request to the SQL experts to get access to data. With the advent of the Apelogic product, we can have people on the support team. We can have executives asking questions of the data. And me as an engineering lead, I'm not worried about Claude not getting the question or the context correct, and yet confidently giving an answer that goes to a customer, or it goes to an outside party. It's really he helped us reduce consistent outputs from our data.
And Joey touched on something that I think is actually key. Usually, let's say you have a sales function for customer success, or you have a content manager that writes content all the time. Wherever there was some need for getting number, they would always, quote unquote, bother the engineering side. Can you give me this number? Can you give me this number? And we were happy to do it, because you want to give it up with confidence, right? Instead of them going and searching the sea of dashboards that we had. So now in this case, that work is completely parallelized and streamlined, and we put up a couple of content on the Helium Mobile network. We cover Mardi Gras in New Orleans, or we cover the Super Bowl effect, and all those data just came straight from that work without the reality, the necessity to bother engineering to get that number for you, type of thing.
Can you also talk about the impact on complexity and resource allocation? What about fragmentation and future proofing, especially in a market where you don't even know which companies will survive?
I think that it's I don't know if cost specifically is the answer that I can give right now, because they're still in the middle of all of that. But what I can tell you, what I just described in efficiency of cycle, that is definitely so. It's not necessarily like a straight up cost saving. It's not like we are letting go people because of that, but the ability for people to not switch context and give the ability to focus on that, and the ability to, like, sales representative to hit their customers in their pipeline faster and returning with their data like twice or three times as faster as they used to, that efficiency will turn into like more revenue, or we already know, more customer engagement and satisfaction, which eventually will turn into revenue. So it's not, I don't know about necessarily cost saving as a thing, but efficiency cycle, absolutely.
One other item on cost is all of our data lives in an AWS, either like an S3 bucket or a database. And what we saw previous to Apelogic is that the marketing team would request its own database that has data X and is structured as Y. And then the engineering team got its own databases, and then the finance team had its own databases specifically created to answer the questions that each of those users asks regularly. And the architecture that we're moving to at the moment puts all of that data in one place, and then it uses the Apelogic interface to expose it to each of these different users, and getting rid of that replication of data is going to save us money every month in our AWS bill.
Boris, based on your experience, what are some of the objections that you have heard from customers about using general purpose agents? Are they against the idea, or are they in favor of the idea?
Well, I think that it's surprisingly, I mean, again, we're still new, so I don't know if I can speak of like macro trends based on the personal experience that I've had, but actually, general purpose agent adoption seems to be a little bit lighter on friction, because the biggest pushback that we have seen working with Helium Mobile and other early access users that we have is the concern about putting the data out there to some LLM. And when you're dealing with the specialized agents, like if we were to continue on the path of like Apelogic is the specialized agent that you install centrally on a server, and we run the LLM, where basically the wrapper around the LLM. You have to show like exactly what LLM you're using, where the data is running, like what are you handing off, what the security procedure is, etc. But like most companies already have Claude in some capacity, and they have already figured out how to align Claude with their security posture. So once we've switched to just hey, we're not a specialized agent, we are just a Claude augmentation layer, that actually eliminated quite a bit of friction from the customer conversations.
How does a company actually get started with Apelogic? They already have their investment, they have existing setups, MCP servers. What does day one look like?
Yeah, so it's been a progression again. I'll share, and Mario, Joey, feel free to chime in. So as I've mentioned, because what we're building largely has been born out of the Helium Mobile use case. The adoption trajectory there has been atypical. We had the specialized agent first, then we basically built this Claude augmentation MCP data gateway, as we call it now, that we've basically handed out to people, and now that's where it is. But like for everybody else, and we have a number of other places where we're basically doing kind of early access trials with customers. The path is as follows. We have like a downloadable binary that's available on Apelogic site. And you can start in kind of like an individual use mode. You literally download it. It installs like a small desktop-based MCP connector. If you already have a connection to the database, it will reuse your existing credentials and your scoped kind of security permissions. Claude will then be able to go through those and talk to data. As it talks to data, it will start automatically accumulating the semantic layer locally. And this is, you can start for free. Anybody who's talking to data right now and wants to try doing that using Claude can do it. Just go to the website, download the binary. And then if and when you like the outcomes, at some point, it usually becomes like a team exercise. So let's say, Joey started and then Mario wants to also do it. And then somebody else wants to join in. And then the database administrator actually wants to start seeing the observability around it and starts actually curating the semantic layer. At that point, it's possible to switch to like a Teams mode, where basically the semantic layer is no longer stored on an individual laptop of a person that's querying the data, but gets pushed to a secure Git repository that whoever is responsible for the semantic layer in a company will specify, and will get continuously updated as people kind of interact with data through Claude.
Joey, Mario, can you share from your perspective, from inside a player, how does it look like for you working with Apelogic?
Yeah, we were introduced to Ape Logic because, as we said earlier, it's a data intensive business, and our data has been growing massively over the last couple of years, and we know that there's useful insights in it, but getting them out was becoming more and more work. And we started working with Boris and his team. And as he laid it out, I mean, we started out as individual users trading semantic hints in chat to update each other's individual users. And at a certain point, it made sense for us to centralize all of that, to give each of the other users learnings generated by everyone.
There's a lot of talk about AI disrupting the SaaS world. Do you think business intelligence tools are going to go away?
Well, I think that right now we're at like a peak AI hype SaaS apocalypse stage. Like a good time to buy SaaS stocks. I'm, kind of, posting on Twitter and LinkedIn about this, and I'm consistently getting comments from people like, "Oh, CLI is the only interface. That's the best interface. That's the only thing that's going to be there." I mean, I don't agree with that. I think that like even within Helium Mobile, it was pretty obvious pretty quickly that like a chatbot interface is pretty limiting. I do think that there's going to be quite a bit of dramatic change to what SaaS is and how the interfaces are built. I think the future is going to be kind of like a combination of a chatbot interface and a rich UX interfaces that are dynamically composed by things like MCP UI that have been gaining traction already. Like you don't, even interacting with data, you don't just want necessarily like an ASCII table that's printed out by whatever Claude into the chat interface, right? You want to see a graph, or you want to see a pretty table that you can interact with, etc. But those tables will need to be kind of like generated on demand. So I don't think that SaaS is going away. I think that the interface will have to change. It's going to become dynamically composable. There's definitely opportunity for new companies to kind of start pushing towards that, and there's also an opportunity for the incumbents to realize that and then start evolving in that direction.
Yeah, that's the way I see it too, because right now everybody, this is kind of realizing the dream of every CEO in terms of like, oh, I can like get rid of all tools and just do this. And then I think that when the dust settles at the end, it's always going to come in the middle. And we'll probably see some startups, sure, maybe smaller companies, they might not go all the way with all CRM system, and they will use systems like this because they're faster, they're agile, they're cheaper. But when it comes to bigger enterprise, I do think that a CLI only type of interface, I agree with Boris, and I think that in the longer term, we'll probably see the big guys to start, doing M&A and doing consolidation around the industry to go faster and build this within their own tooling. So I think that's kind of usually how it goes for any type of big disruption in the markets. Like at large, we've consistently seen that, I think. Like EV, imagine like what the electric vehicles was and what it is today for car manufacturer. Imagine what Ford stance was when the EV started, what Ford stance is today about EV, and you realize that that's usually how the dust settles.
What is the long-term vision of Apelogic? Where does this go in 2 to 3 years in such a volatile market?
I think that as software in general becomes easier and easier to build, there is very few moats that still remain. There's very few things that, as an enterprise, one will own and one will pay for. One of those is the data, obviously, which is stored in enterprise databases, and the other is just the what I refer to as like the enterprise context. So like very simple example is like the Helium's definition of monthly active user. That is like a Helium thing that will evolve with Helium, that Helium will always want to own and control. So my vision of the future is that the enterprise will look like it'll have its data, quantitative data in the databases. It'll have its organizational context or organizational memory, keeping what is monthly active user and what is quality of service and what is the workflow to do this and that. And the software becomes sort of like, this liquid in the vessel that's built of data and context. And we want to be the context part of the vessel. So right now we're focusing on probably the hardest place where the context is most important, which is around querying the databases. But in general, longer term, I think I can see us evolving into more of like a enterprise memory layer for operating the company in the agentic world.
For a C-level executive and data engineers who are watching the show, what's the one thing they should be doing differently right now when it comes to AI investment?
My main advice is to stop buying specialized agents and start focusing on using general purpose ones and making the general purpose agents more effective within your organization. So this is for all the C-level executives and for the data scientists. So instead of buying 105th specialized agentic data science tool, just use Claude or whatever you choose as your general purpose agent of choice, and focus on connecting it to tools and data within the organization.
Boris, Mario, Joey, thank you so much for joining me and sharing these insights on why general purpose agents are a smarter bet for enterprises than specialized agents. Thanks for those great insights, and I look forward to the next conversation. Thank you. And for those watching, if you are rethinking your AI strategy, check out Apelogic AI, and don't forget to subscribe to TFIR, like this video, and share it with your team. Thanks for watching.